For decades, Jim Carrey looked like the happiest man in Hollywood. He could make an entire theater explode with laughter. He could turn his face into a cartoon. He could move his body like it had no bones. He could walk into a scene and instantly become the most unpredictable person in the room. But behind that extraordinary talent was a much quieter story. A story about poverty, rejection, ambition, loss, and a man who eventually realized that becoming famous wasn't the same thing as becoming happy. This is the story of Jim Carrey, not the comedian everyone remembers, but the man behind the laughter. The boy who learned to make people. Laugh Jim Carrey grew up in Canada in a family that knew financial hardship. His father, Percy, worked as an accountant, but after losing his job, the family's circumstances changed dramatically. The security they had known disappeared. The family struggled to make ends meet. At one point, they lived in a Volkswagen van. For a young Jim, the experience was unforgettable. He learned that life could change without warning, and perhaps that is where something inside him began to develop. If life could be painful, maybe laughter could make it easier. Carrey discovered that making people laugh gave him something powerful: attention, connection, and eventually a way out, the dream that wouldn't die. As a teenager, Carrey began performing comedy. He was different from other young performers. He wasn't satisfied with simply telling jokes. He wanted to transform himself. His expressions became exaggerated. His movements became physical. His voice could change instantly. He could become ridiculous without hesitation. But talent wasn't enough. The entertainment industry was full of people with dreams. Carrey needed persistence, so he kept performing. He kept auditioning, he kept failing, and he kept going. Eventually, he moved to Los Angeles to pursue comedy and acting. But success still didn't arrive immediately. There were years of uncertainty, years when the dream looked impossible. Then, television changed everything. The face that couldn't be ignored. Carrey joined the cast of In Living Color. Suddenly, audiences discovered what made him different. He didn't simply perform comedy. He became the comedy. His characters were physical, loud, unpredictable, almost impossible to imitate. He had an energy that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than ordinary ambition, and Hollywood noticed. But nobody could have predicted what would happen next. 1994, the year Jim Carrey took over Hollywood. Then came 1994, 3 movies, 3 completely different characters, and 1 actor: Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber. Each movie revealed another side of Carrey's talent. Ace Ventura was loud and outrageous. Stanley Ipkiss was transformed by supernatural power. Lloyd Christmas was unbelievably foolish. But all 3 characters had something in common. They were unmistakably Jim Carrey. Hollywood suddenly had a new superstar, and this time, the world was watching. The price of becoming a superstar success came quickly, perhaps too quickly. Carrey went from struggling comedian to one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. His salary reportedly reached extraordinary levels. For the cable guy, he became one of the first actors to receive a reported $20 million upfront salary. It was the kind of money that seemed impossible. The dream had come true. But something strange happens when you finally reach the top. You discover that the top doesn't necessarily feel the way you imagined. When the comedian became an actor, Carrey could have spent the rest of his career making silly comedies. Instead, he took a risk. He wanted to prove that there was more to him. Then came The Truman Show. Truman Burbank was funny. but he was also lonely, confused, trapped, and desperate to discover the truth about his life. Carrey's performance surprised audiences. The comedian could act, and not just act. He could break hearts. Then came Man on the Moon. Carrey portrayed Andy Kaufman, one of the most unconventional performers in entertainment history. The role demanded something different. It required Carrey to disappear into another personality. And once again, he proved that the face audiences knew for comedy could carry something much darker. The smile starts to fade, but while Carrey's career continued rising, his personal life became more complicated. He experienced marriages and relationships that ended. He faced intense public scrutiny, and he became increasingly open about his struggles with depression. That revelation changed how many people viewed him, because the public had created an image of Jim Carrey as the man who was always happy, always energetic, always making everyone laugh. But happiness isn't a performance, and comedy doesn't protect anyone from sadness. Sometimes, the funniest person in the room is fighting the hardest battle when the cameras stop. The Truman Show becomes uncomfortably real years after The Truman Show. The movie began to feel almost prophetic. Truman's entire existence was being watched. Every relationship, every decision, every emotion, millions of strangers consumed his life as entertainment. Jim Carrey eventually experienced his own version of that pressure. Not because his life was secretly a television show, but because fame turned his private existence into something the public felt entitled to examine. Every relationship could become a headline. Every statement could become a controversy. Every mistake could become entertainment. The man who played Truman understood something about fame that many actors never experience. Being watched isn't the same thing as being understood. The man who stopped chasing Hollywooders. The years passed. Carrey began changing. He became more interested in painting, art doc, philosophy, politics, spiritual questions. He seemed less fascinated by the machinery of Hollywood. The actor who once appeared desperate to become famous no longer seemed desperate to remain famous. That transformation was significant because Carrey had already achieved what millions of people dream about. He had money, fame, awards, blockbusters, recognition, and yet he still had to figure out what any of it meant when fame isn't enough. This may be the most important chapter of Jim Carrey's story. He spent his youth believing that success could change everything. If he became a famous comedian, if he became a movie star, if he earned millions, then perhaps life would finally feel complete. But success doesn't remove uncertainty. Money doesn't erase loneliness. Fame doesn't guarantee peace. And awards don't automatically create happiness. Carrey eventually seemed to understand that. The goal had changed. He no longer needed to prove that he could conquer Hollywood. He needed to understand himself. The legacy behind the Laughter Gym. Carrey's influence on comedy is enormous. His physical style inspired countless performers. His movies became cultural landmarks. His characters became instantly recognizable. Ace Ventura, The Mask, Lloyd Christmas, Truman Burbank, Andy Kaufman. Each one remains unforgettable. But perhaps his greatest legacy is more personal. He showed audiences that a comedian could be absurd one year and devastatingly dramatic the next. He proved that physical comedy could coexist with serious acting, and he reminded people that behind even the biggest smile, there can be another story. A man still searching. Today, Jim Carrey's relationship with Hollywood is very different from the one he had in the 1990s. He has continued to appear on screen, including his return as Dr. Robotnik in the Sonic the Hedgehog films. but he no longer seems driven by the same hunger that once pushed him forward. Perhaps that's because he already won the race. He became the star he dreamed of becoming. Now the question isn't, how famous can Jim Carrey become? It's, who is Jim Carrey when he doesn't need to be famous anymore? His story began with a boy who discovered that laughter could change a room. That boy became a comedian. The comedian became a television star. The television star became a movie phenomenon. The movie star became a millionaire, and the millionaire eventually discovered something nobody had warned him about. You can have almost everything and still feel like something is missing. Maybe that's why Jim Carrey's story continues to resonate, because underneath the jokes is something deeply human. The desire to be seen, the desire to matter, the desire to escape hardship, the desire to become somebody, and eventually, the desire to simply be yourself. Jim Carrey spent decades making the world laugh, but perhaps his most important performance was learning to remove the mask, to admit that he wasn't always happy, that success didn't solve everything, that life could hurt, and that being vulnerable didn't make him weak. It made him human. For years, the world saw Jim Carrey as the man behind the funniest faces in Hollywood. But behind those faces was a man who spent much of his life searching for something far more difficult than fame, peace. And perhaps that is the real Jim Carrey story. Not how he became famous, but what happened after he finally got everything he thought he wanted. The world laughed with him. The world watched him rise. And eventually the man behind the smile had to learn how to live when nobody was laughing.